digital single market. So we heard this morning from the private sector. This afternoon we're going to try and see if there's any common threads, common barriers, lessons that can be learned, how we can tie it all together so that we end today on a high with lots of concrete ideas. And we're going to have some interventions, then we have a few showcases, and then we will, as this morning, sit down and have a discussion. So let me introduce our first speaker, and that is Jean-Jacques Leandri, who is speaking about e-government from the French government perspective. Thank you, Jean-Jacques.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to speak about our brand new strategy on public transformation, and specifically on e-government. I know that it's not easy to speak and to listen after lunch. I will try to be, to be quick on that, and I have some slides to present that. I don't know if you know certainly that we have got a new president and a new government since May of this year, and the president decided a new strategy in order to speed up the transformation of public services. And we have a lot of work to do with a deadline in March next year. And I will try to explain some of the topics of our strategy. If it works, I don't know. Yes, okay. So, this strategy is called Action Publique in French. Action Publique, I don't know the translation in English. I think that it's a public action or public policy. And the deadline is like the commitment in the Ministerial Declaration of Tallinn is 2022. It's the end of the mandate of our president, and it's the year of the new election for presidency. The main characteristic of this strategy is the strong link with the budgetary procedure. Because it's a challenge, but it's also a mean to impose some discipline and reorganization to ministries. So it's interesting on that. The strategy has three objectives. The first one is to improve the quality of public services and relations between administration and users. The second one is to provide civil servants with a good work environment. And the third one is to accompany the lowering of the public expenditure with a goal. It's to lower the public expenditures by 3 points at the end of the period in the French GDP. They are also willing to reduce people in the French administrations. On 5 years, we want to reduce to withdraw 120,000 people, including 50,000 in the state administrations and its main operators, because there are several operators of the French administration which are independent entities, and we want to get economies on that. There will be a huge investment in the field of transformation, 57 billion during the period of 5 years. And if I remember well, for e-government, it will be 9 billion on this 57. And the last point is that the Prime Minister sent months ago roadmaps to each ministry in order to present a transformation plan. So, what is the strategy? we can resume in 4 commitments in double ambition and 2 aspects. 4 commitments taken by the President Macron. The first one is to get 100% of public services digitized during the period. It's the same like the Tallinn Declaration, because in the Tallinn Declaration we speak about digital by default. So it's the same commitment. The second one is to build a state as a platform, to have a platform of the state able to deliver services and to apply the once only principle in services for citizens and companies. The third one is to open up the public data and mainly to create API in order to enable administration to go to the right information in other administration and to avoid to ask this information to the user, because the user has already provided this information to one administration in France, and we consider that this information has to be reused by the other ministries. And the fourth one, it's the reduction of public expenditure. I told it before. To aim, the first one is to have kind of information system, sovereign, agile, modern, and open to the outside world. And second one is to operate the transformation, getting the best from digital, because it's not very easy to convince ministry to focus on digital and to put digital on the priorities of transformation. And the 2 aspects, there is an aspect, a chapter for each ministry, and there is an horizontal chapter for the state information system. So, what is the modus operandi? The Prime Minister asked to the ministries to provide him with a transformation plan by at the end of March 2018. And we set up 8 working groups in order to solve some problems or some issues. And each working group is led by one CIO of one ministry. It's interesting to have this kind of method of working, because we can involve directly the CIOs, and we can help them to speak with their colleagues. These 8 groups have to reach some objectives. The first one is to identify the public policies which should be transformed in priority. It's not very easy today to say in each ministry what is the public policy to transform in priority. So it's the work of the first working group. Second working group, it's to identify the administrative procedures to simplify first and to digitize, also in priority. The third, it's about the new digital services to develop for citizens, for companies, for administrations also, because there is also, an administration is also a user of digital government. The fourth one is to improve the business process for civil servants. It's linked to the work environment explained before. The fifth is to open data more, because we are pioneer in open data in France. We led last year the public open government partnership which is an organization through, I remember, I think that there will be 32 or 33 countries. And we think that we have to open data for everybody or every company, and also to create API. Then we have also to ask ministry to improve their websites in order to be more interesting for users, in order to allow them to go to the right information or the right service. The seventh group, it's linked with the conference. It's to create or to develop and to reuse building blocks in order to save money, and to provide ministers to keep developing its own application, its own tool. And the last is new ways for work organization. We are in favor of state startup for incubators, in order to facilitate the migration of old system to new one, more agile for citizens, for companies, and also for administrations. The digital transformation plan, which should be presented by the ministries, have to take into account this digital aspect and these questions. They have to answer these 8 questions and to present that in a document, which will be a commitment to do something during 5 years. And my entity, which is Directorate General for Digital and State Information System, will support and help ministries in order to build their plan and to achieve the commitments and the objectives of this plan. There are 8 working groups, I said, and in the working groups, the topics are, for instance, working environment for civil servants, optimization of the existing management, because we have a lot of things to do in this way, the issues related to the state network security. We consider since 2014 that there is one state information system with some system in the ministry, but there is only one information system. And we have to secure it. We have also a national network for administration, Réseau interministériel de l'État in French. And so this single network and this single system is not easy to manage, but it's a condition to have security and to have also mutualization of tools, of systems. And it's a mean for us to say to the ministries, we have to reuse building blocks developed by another ministry, which is very interesting for us. And so we don't want to give you resources to build your own system. You have to reuse if it's appropriate. Also, there is a group regarding the support of digital transformation, because we have to accompany ministries to transform their own services, and they need to have advices, to have help also, and also to have budgetary and human resources in order to speed up the transformation in their department. So we want to do that, and at the horizontal level, we have to be able to allocate resources in order to help, notably the the small ministries which have not all the resources in human resource, for instance, to do this kind of transformation. And we want to improve the state information system and in order, for instance, to have interoperability between state services and local authorities, because it's not very obvious today, and also to have interoperability with other administrations in Europe, because it's also, we have to apply a legal framework in the field of eIDAS, in the field of single digital gateway, in the field of CEF, and we want to get the best from all the commitments we have taken during the 2 or 3 years ago, and also to benefit from resources of the European budget. And it's a mean to impose a mutualization between ministries and to say we have to look, and we can help you to look after all the ministries in order to identify some system which can be suitable for you, and we can help you to go faster in the transformation. And the last thing is to have a pooling of resources between ministries, to be able to help, because we have in France 15 ministries, huge ministries like finance, social affairs, interior, but we have also very small ministries without any digital resource, and we want to have a balance between all the entities, and we want to help them in this field. I think that it's the last point. I don't know if I was too long. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the very interesting case study, look at the French perspective. And what we are going to hear from our following now speakers is a little bit look at EU level, member state level, and then more regional and local. And with that in mind, we have Robert Behr, Consultant and Project Manager from the Federal Computing Center of Austria.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Very nice and good afternoon from my side. I am a consultant and manager at the Federal Computing Center in Austria. But I'm speaking here on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Justice in Austria, since I will show you how e-justice is in Austria and how e-justice went or goes cross-border from Austria's point of view. This is also quietly connected with the story of, or with the history of e-Codex. E-Codex is the large-scale pilot project in the justice area. So, jump into the story. I am starting with something national, how the situation in Austria is with national e-filing. Let's say the heart or the cornerstone of Austria's e-filing is the elektronischer Rechtsverkehr in German. That's the national e-filing system that interconnects with the practitioners, with the lawyers, and which makes the interconnection between those practitioners and all the justice applications we are running in Austria. Just as an example, the application for court automation is the one for the software for the courts. We have, of course, a land register, we have a company register, but there are numerous other applications that are fully electronic and that are fed with the input received from the lawyers, from practitioners, from notaries, from social security, from insurance companies, via so-called clearinghouse. The clearinghouse is more or less a technical interface between the practitioners and our national e-filing system. This is just the reason that we have, let's say, a defined interface, and the clearinghouse has to make the interconnection to the practitioner based on a contract between ministry and the lawyers, of course. Exception from this situation is the police, for example. They have a direct connection to the electronic national filing system. And from them we get, for example, the police reports in electronic form. So this is the starting point. And I'm saying this since one of the intentions of the justice system, or of e-justice was, or of e-codex was, that we want to keep the systems in the member states as they are, and we just want to interconnect them. So when we now go cross-border, then let's say on the left-hand side you see the Austrian system, and now the building blocks come into play. As I said, we want to keep the national solutions as they are, and the components that are involved here is the gateway. That's the e-delivery component. That's, by the way, it's the same that we have already heard today in the eSense video, as far as I've seen. And this gateway is, let's say, the peer connection to the outside world, outside Austria in this case. And on the other side, receiving member state, you have the same situation. You will also have a gateway, and those gateways communicate with each other based on a technical standard. In order to be able to send something from a lawyer to, let's assume, to Germany, we also need a so-called connector, and the connector is more or less the glue between the national system, our elektronischer Rechtsverkehr, and the gateway. And the connector is more or less a mapper, a technical mapper of the proprietary system in Austria or in any other country, and a standard that is used for exchanging the information between the member states. Concretely, we are connected here with the member states Germany, Italy, Greece, Poland, Estonia. We are running the legal procedures for the European payment order and for the small claims. This is simply the reason that these proceedings have a legal base that is very usable. Those regulations have structured forms, and structured forms can be very well used for exchange of such information. So an Austrian lawyer is in the same situation if he sends a claim to a court in Vienna, works in the same way as if he sends a claim to the Amtsgericht Wedding in Berlin, for example. So just to have this here in mind, the building blocks that we have here is the e-delivery building block, the gateway. For the techies, it's the version 3.2 that we are using at the moment. The e-signature is more or less based on the DSS library provided by CEF. And the eID is more or less provided by the, let's say, closed user group created with the elektronischer Rechtsverkehr. Worth mentioning, we are also on the way to interconnect with the e-justice portal. We are very close for going live, and we will also use here the proceedings, European payment order, and small claims. Yeah, another use case is the interconnection with the BRIS platform. BRIS is a central system that should exchange information between national company registers. And we have also implemented this interconnection, and the idea or the technology is quite the same between our Austrian company register, or Firmenbuch in German, and the BRIS platform. Again, we have as backbone the elektronischer Rechtsverkehr involved, and the components connector gateway on our side, and on the respective other side the same as discussed before. So we're interconnecting to this BRIS platform, and the effect is that we can exchange information between the interconnected company registers. Use cases are cross-border merger and branch disclosure. But what's also possible is that you can make a search at the e-justice portal, for example, for a company number in the interconnected registers, and you will get a list of companies with the name that you are looking for example. That's already live. You can take a look at the e-justice portal and try this search function. So again, technology is again the building blocks that we are having from CEF, and it works pretty fine. Yeah, as outlook, we have The work that we have done here is based on the e-Codex project. The e-Codex was finished by May 2016, but we are maintaining the results of this project in the project e-Codex, M for maintenance of e-Codex. And this maintenance should ensure, together with CEF, that we keep our software components up to date and that we are keeping our productive systems up and running. We also want to bring in, of course, additional member states or additional partners that want to join. And the second big step, I think, is the project called EXEC. That's a project that has the goal to exchange electronic evidences between member states. Electronic evidences means, in this case, that we might also have to consider large files with let's say, some gigabytes that should be moved from A to B using, again, the technology of the building blocks that we have applied in e-Codex. So this project is being to start in, I think, February next year. And here we will use the next version or the next generation of the e-delivery building block, which will have a version 4.x, together with an updated version of the connector as well. Yeah, the goal is to exchange e-evidences. The, let's say, partners who will be interconnected here are most likely the prosecution offices in the member states. But of course, this depends also on the competent authority in the respective member state. So all in all, that's my story. And I say thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Okay, well, we've heard a lot today about e-signatures, e-ID, and e-delivery. Now we're going to hear from another element, which is the e-invoicing part, because, of course, there are 5 building blocks, and we will come back to e-translation a little bit later. Charles Bryant is the Secretary-General from the European E-invoicing Service Providers Association.
Thank you very much. Let's go back. Okay, well, as has been said, a great pleasure to talk to you this afternoon very briefly in my so-called showcase. Electronic invoicing is one of the CEF building blocks. It's a little bit different in character to some of the ones you've been looking at earlier. Just set a little bit of context as to the perspective I have on this. We're a trade association of private sector service providers who provide e-invoicing services to buyers and suppliers. And there's a whole variety of different entities who have a business around delivering network solutions, business process outsourcing. We're an international not-for-profit association. We focus on public policy, compliance, an interoperable ecosystem. I'll talk about that in a minute. And various other activities. Of course, we're interested to have the adoption of e-invoicing much more widely spread in the economy. We're on a journey. We think critical mass has been achieved, but there's a lot more to do. And we work in many EU and standards initiatives. Just to give you just a little bit of metrics, we do an annual survey of our members, and we are on a dramatic growth path as various parts of the economy, industries, public sector take on e-invoices. Our latest numbers for 2016 showed figures of 1.6 billion amongst a subset of our members who reported. So before I get into the building block itself, what are the benefits of e-invoicing? Let's be clear what it is. The invoice, of course, is an important mission-critical document in all trade of any kind. The supply of goods and services from a producer or supplier or seller to a buyer usually involves an invoice. What's important to stress is it's also one of the major methods by which tax is collected. In other words, the governments outsource a huge element of the tax collection within the economy, amounting to 25–30% of all government revenue, is usually at this point collected through VAT. It's a key step once we take on board e-invoicing in the automation of supply chains. So it starts with procurement, which has been mentioned, orders, all of the logistics associated with goods and services, and then, of course, payments. And this covers the B2B world, the B2G world, the B2C world, and it's a pervasive activity. There are very significant savings and efficiency benefits in the adoption of electronic invoicing. Surveys report savings of at least 17, I mean, these are just instances of surveys, at least 17 euros per invoice, 60% of savings in the process of receiving and reconciling paper invoices, not to mention the fact invoices get lost, create fraud, errors, tax evasion. And e-invoicing also is found as a natural characteristic that if people receive an e-invoice, they pay it quicker. So it takes away that dead money in the economy where people are waiting to be paid. Some people, of course, use the e-invoice to put it in a diary system and actually even prolong the payment. But let's say there is a major opportunity to accelerate payments in e-invoicing. The European Union, for several years, I've been involved for about 10 years in e-invoicing, coming from the payments world, actually, where I led a major initiative you may have heard of called SEPA, which was the complete integration of the retail payment services across the European Union. They then tapped me on the shoulder and says, this is another one where we would like to see pan-European adoption of e-invoicing. And they have been very active, when I say they, the European Union in its various directorates and activities, in bringing stakeholders together, improving the regulatory treatment. It's perfectly legal, it's well supported by laws and regulations, and encouraging adoption as part of the single digital market. Their most recent and important regulation was the Directive 2014, whereby all public contracting entities, and you saw a slide earlier, there's about 300,000 of those, are required within the next 2 years to adopt e-invoicing in the sense that every one of those public contracting entities must be able to receive and process an e-invoice. And the method chosen through the directive was to create a standard for that, and I'm going to talk a bit about that standard. And just a quotation from the directive there, the benefits of electronic invoicing are maximized when the generation, sending, transmission, reception, and processing of an invoice is fully automated. And the only way to do that actually is to use structured data from a standard. So a PDF, which many of you will see as an electronic invoice, this is very common, isn't really e-invoicing, although a PDF may be rendered as part of a process because human readability is an issue for invoices. People need to read them, so they may be rendered, but the core invoice has to be in structured data form. We believe that member states will go beyond this fairly simple obligation at the moment to receive and process and actually require suppliers. At the moment, in the directive itself, suppliers are not forced to send one of these invoices using this standard, but the directive opens up the possibility for member states to go further than the directive and require suppliers to any public entity or a selection of public entities to render e-invoices. Many countries, by the way, Denmark is sitting over to my left, have been doing this for years. I mean, this isn't new at all. So we have a very different rate of progress amongst different member states. But here's the first, if you like, pan-European initiative to create an environment where e-invoicing is regarded as just absolutely matter of fact. The standard that's been created is called a norm and was finished this year by a technical committee of voluntary experts, supported, by the way, by CEF and the EU Commission. There's a novel feature of this standard, and that is often in a standard for a document. We're talking essentially a document here. Standards, of course, vary enormously. We could be talking about standards for EID or transmission or delivery. We're talking about the standard of the actual invoice And what was done here, and I think it was a very creative idea, was the standard separated the semantics from the syntax. Often a standard in the past has been a vertical, where the semantics are embedded or implicit in the syntax. On this occasion, it's a horizontal view. We created a semantic model for the e-invoice. By e-invoice, of course, we mean the meanings, the references, the actual business language within the invoice. That is separated from the technical expression of the invoice through XML coding, and that's the machine-readable language in which something is expressed. So this was a novel enterprise where we split those, and we would commend that, by the way, to all other projects of this type. And on top of the semantic model, which is the core standard, there are syntax bindings, so-called, to create the machine-readable expressions of the semantics. There's some usage specifications, extensions, and some guidelines for transmission. I haven't got time today either to go through all of the other building blocks which come into the e-invoicing world, e-delivery, eID. These are all relevant to invoicing, but we haven't got time today. Those are also in use. But I'm talking today about the actual building block, which is the standard itself. The result is that it's a fit-for-purpose e-invoice for use in both business to government, and it's been designed also for business to business. And so we think it'll obtain a lot of use and a lot of recognition in the B2B market. E-invoices come in lots of standards, by the way. In fact, my members in the E-invoicing Service Providers Association are used to lots of standards. It's like water off a duck's back. They can do format conversion and render the invoice in any format they want. So this isn't going to be a huge challenge on the service side. The challenge is going to be on the buyer side of actually integrating this into their ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, and their accounting world, and making it happen from a management will point of view. Just to mention implementation, this is where CEF come in. Now we start implementation. I haven't got time to go through all the tremendous examples that are emerging across the EU at the moment. Obviously here in Belgium, where my association is based, the Belgian government is active. The French government with its chorus system is already running ahead. We've got Germany looking, of course, multi-level political structure there. The Nordics I've mentioned already, they do this anyway. So waking up tomorrow and implementing this standard is not going to be a big deal. Italy has taken some very strong measures. Spain has taken some strong measures. So this is the road ahead is already showing good examples. CEF is providing a conformance testing environment. It's providing country information. It's providing awareness training and a knowledge base. It has a grants program to support early adopters. It's providing community animation, stakeholder follow-up, and an element of service desk, and a very good website called E-invoicing Readiness website, I think, the latest name of it. Just be clear, the real benefits of e-invoicing do not come from adopting the standard and sending an invoice in the format. It's really about the workflow and process redesign in the back office of both the receiver and the supplier to automate the end-to-end process, to really get the value added from the whole process in the office environment. Gentleman mentioned within the civil service environment, for example, it only makes sense if the e-invoices are automated, and that will help towards more productivity. So now the hard work begins amongst the end users. This is the public sector. As I said before, my members tend to be active so far in the private sector. A lot of major multinational companies are very big in e-invoicing. We now have the big test of getting the public sector to be really organized and committed, and supported, of course, by my members, the service providers, the IT teams, the consultants who will help. So that really was my little summary of e-invoicing building block. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Now we have Esther Makaay, who is the EID specialist at Connectis, and she is going to tell us about a eIDAS Municipalities Project. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm Esther Makaay. I've got an antenna sticking out here because women's clothing don't come with pockets, but that's a topic for a different day. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite projects ever. Let's see, green arrow will do it. Not which one? Yeah.
Hit the next button.
It doesn't do next. It doesn't listen to me.
Yep.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, so if you don't want to listen to anything else after all the information that you got today, go visit this website. It's all there. eIDAS2018.eu. There's user stories, there's server provider stories, there's information on what we do. If you're interested, hook up with us and we'll talk to you. So what is it that we do? Well, easy. We hooked up 18 municipalities with literally hundreds of services to EU countries. About 12 of them, which are now diminishing to 8, but I'll talk about that later. And it works. That's it. Plain and simple, right? It was co-financed by the European Connecting Europe facility. Luckily, it was supported by the Ministry of Economic Affairs, even though municipalities are, of course, interior affairs. But eIDAS by then was economic affairs. And we're following up this project because we now hooked up about 2/3 of our municipalities. And we think everyone should be connected. They have to be connected eventually in, well, almost a year's time. But we think they should do it right now already. And we want to encourage them to open up more services to their audiences. Because these are live services. We want to prepare them for Europe 2018, eIDAS, and beyond. As I said, these are real services, not tests or pilots, and they work, which means that they should continue working. And right now, we're sort of being drawn back by all these eIDAS movements, because there were countries, we started out using the large-scale pilots, such as Stork, hooking up countries that aren't eIDAS compliant yet. But they're moving towards that, so they're telling us, well, forget about Stork, come back in a few months' time, and then we'll be eIDAS compliant, and we'll think about notifying. And up until then, just wait it out. And I have to tell 18 municipalities, I'm sorry, Czechia won't be in the next batch, or Sweden doesn't work anymore, or Estonia is out for now, which is really weird, because it was working last year. How come they now cannot deliver these services anymore? So we're also looking into ways to sort of have an alternative route for that up until the point that each and every country is ready for eIDAS and working. And one of the funny things we see now is that this is not about Europe completely. This is about going global, because there's municipalities coming up to us saying, okay, this really works well for the European expats. We're happy. Can you make it work for the Chinese population as well? Or we've got some Africans here who would love to be able to do the same as the other expats. Schools, education is typically this environment where foreign students aren't EU only. So we really need to make this work, not just within Connecting Europe internally, but Connecting Europe also on a global scale. And I think these CEF building blocks can be a real advantage for that as well. Of course, the legal details here are completely different. Trust issues aren't really guaranteed if you're talking about these solutions. But then again, if you come from a municipality level, how much trust do you need guaranteed from higher up? Because this is about people being able to make a report on property damage or requesting a permit to set up a market stand at an event. These are situations that you can deal with regardless of really high trust level security needed. But it's the everyday hassle that gets diminished, and it's the everyday value that people now experience and are really happy to do so. I could talk for hours on this, could give you 20 more slides, both on the technical, operational details as on all the sorts of issues involved here. If you are interested in that, please find me during the break, ask your questions. I'll be happy to respond. I think my email was on the first slide. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Esther, and I'd like to invite back up our other speakers and our two other guest speakers, whom I will introduce as we get up here. So, joining our showcase speakers now, we also have from Digit, Dirk Stockmans, who's head of the unit for Trans-European Services, and from the Estonian Permanent Representation, Lukas Ilves, Counsellor for Digital Affairs. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining here. Dirk, let me start with you. I guess you're not surprised by anything you heard in our three showcases, but perhaps you could tell me what were the highlights for you?
I think the highlights are always how this is of real use in the real world for the real citizen. Because after all, I think the European ideal is that we make Europe a better place, and Europe is often depicted as being too far from the citizen and just doing administration and extra laws and unnecessary things. And this really shows that it is working, that's on the ground, that it is making a difference, and that it really pushes things forward. And that's extremely satisfying.
Lukas, your thoughts. Are we close enough to the citizen with these building blocks?
Well, I have to make a plug. I know it's been mentioned a few times for the Tallinn e-government declaration. We here in Brussels have to get to the citizen through our governments in the European Parliament. So, you know, we're the wrong person to ask about citizens. But I think what the political principles we agreed in Tallinn really point to, and we talked about the once only principle, about trustworthiness and security, about accessibility and user-friendliness. These are all things that are much, much easier if you have standardized building blocks. I mean, if you don't have to redevelop solutions from scratch, it's easier to deal with the security problems, it's easier to make sure that they're accessible, and it's easier than to build something that's user-friendly, that uses the most up-to-date web standards and so on.
Can I comment on
Sure.
that? Because I hear you saying that we in Europe need to go through central governments to reach the citizens. I think my project, although the high-level context went through the central government, is a great example of how public services can be opened up through private organizations that sort of push the wagon.
No, I don't disagree with you. I was just making a cynical quip about Brussels.
Okay.
Well, we're talking about sort of seamless services. How easy is that to deliver, and is there a discrepancy between different member states where one is very integrated and one maybe is not, without naming names? Obviously, Estonia is wonderful. What's your take?
Yes, indeed, Emma. There are discrepancies between member states. That's true. What we learned, especially in the Codex project, is that it's very important, or one of the cornerstones is to have already some backend system available in the system that you can interconnect. This is in any case a good starting point. What could help to overcome, let's say, the different implementations is to use, let's say, common standard applications. For example, European Payment Order. We have an application together with Germany that is one application in the same form for both countries, and this could be reused in other member states as well. So all in all, having backend systems and making this interoperability layer, this should provide the access to justice, as we always say, also in the Codex context, easier for citizens, for companies, for lawyers.
Charles, to come to you, I want to ask, because of your sort of unique position, whether you see any fundamental differences between what the building blocks can offer to the private sector versus the public sector.
Well, just mentioning quickly a point on the last question. I mean, the essence is we all start from somewhere. I mean, we all come from cultures and backgrounds and historical developments, the role of the private sector. So it's not a big surprise that we have to deal with a lot of diversity. As far as the private and public sectors are concerned, in the space my members are active is procurement and invoicing and payment for goods and services. It's a partnership. I mean, it has to be. And the suppliers, we talked about over 20 million SMEs in the economy. Talk about the large buyers, large suppliers. Talk about governments. They're all different. And without creating that partnership, it ain't going to work. And so that's why the artifacts we do create need to be able to deal with their different interests. I think, I daren't comment really on the, in general about the public sector, but I must say, I think getting the stuff done inside the public sector can be very challenging. There's no question about that. And so getting the project up and running, getting the change effect quickly established. There are lots of private sector companies who are also very cautious. And that's why it's a long journey, what I'm talking about. This isn't a quick fix. It's funny that the invoice, which is so prevalent in society as an object for cataloguing a trade, is perhaps one of the last things. You know, we've done tickets and all that, and transport and airlines and booking things. But this one is going to be a long journey. So I don't want to be too generalizing about the differences, but there are obviously differences.
Well, we talk about developing these sorts of services for the end user. And so what I'd like to know is, when we come to talking about public services, is the end user the civil servant who's using it, or is it ultimately the citizen? And are those two aligned, or is there an inherent tension between the two? Esther?
It's both. To me, the municipalities are as much users of these building blocks as citizens. And I know we all love to talk about citizens because we can relate to them. And right now, the digital analogy is, you know, if I enter Belgium with my Dutch passport, they go, okay. They don't say, well, you need a Belgian passport to enter this country. And this is what's happening in the digital world right now. So we can empathize with that. But then these municipalities, to them, Europe is really far away. And they're struggling with opening up their services digitally anyway. So having standardized means to explain to them how they can, you know, if they're doing it anyway for the Dutch audience, they can take in Europe with just one extra step. But to me, the real issue isn't just these end users and the value that they're gaining. It's also, in my slide, I made the same mistake. There's at least 3 to 5 other companies within this chain to make it happen. And they need to understand the value and the purpose, and they need to be facilitated to make their part of this chain work as well.
Dirk, your thoughts on identifying this end user?
Yes, this is exactly why our team, our building blocks team, is doing so much outreach, because we really want to create this ecosystem of all the people working together and understanding each other's needs and being in constant dialogue on how can we make this better, how can we scale this up, how can we roll this out in the most efficient way.
A slightly different question to you, Lucas, then. How much is it the job of public authorities to push citizens in the direction of digital services?
To me, you know, the reason that this is flying now in the public sector is because there's this directive out that says you need to do this. That's the only reason right now. And because they understand that they need to do this, it's moving along. And that sort of traction helps everyone along. And I think that is really important. And the other thing, I'm not sure, this is also in national debates. For example, our municipalities are opening up their services, and we've got a few systems in the Netherlands where there's a variety of 4 or 5 different levels of assurance. So they are the service provider, they need to decide which level of assurance is appropriate. They are clueless. And in my imagination, municipalities all through Europe deal with waste collection or statements of residency. So it would really help them if they could get some guidelines or just a generic, for waste collection, use this level of assurance. That's the minimum. And they will follow that, but they really need these guidelines because they're so confused.
I mean, ideally, I think we could say that the private sector and sort of bottom-up solutions alone will take care of things, but I think empirically what we've seen is that if government gives a push, then things go a lot further. And if you flip things around and ask, how much can you do if government isn't coming along, it really puts a ceiling on your ambition because there's so much reporting that has to be done to government anyway. And I think that's maybe the citizen-civil servant dichotomy isn't the one to focus on because you have the middle, the prosumer, the small business, if you will, which actually is having much more interaction with government than your average citizen. I mean, as a citizen, if I'm on social benefits, maybe a bit more, but otherwise, I pay my taxes once a year. Maybe every once in a while I have something to do with a bureaucrat. Now, if I'm a small business with VAT reporting, with the permitting that I need to do, I'm the one who's seeing government on a weekly basis, whether it's in the paper or the digital world. The good news there is they're probably a smaller audience and someone it's a bit easier to both pull along and sometimes sort of push along than sort of the citizens as a whole who might have a better argument on sort of just plain not wanting to adopt the digital solution.
Charles?
Yes, I think it's about the level of ambition that public authorities want to take on. There's always a danger in a directive or a mass adoption initiative that people just do the minimum. So what is the minimum I have to do to get a tick in the box that says I've achieved the requirement? And of course, certainly the case I'm talking about, electronic invoicing, or I prefer to use the word supply chain automation. It's a sort of bigger theme, of which e-invoicing is very important. That it's incredibly important that the public authority takes on a level of ambition that is very high. Not out of reach, because there are plenty of people to help deliver it. So, for example, I mentioned Denmark before. I won't embarrass Sven any more than I've already done, but they've been on a 10-year journey. They've cracked it. They're up there, well over 90% of adoption. And then they really get the benefit because of the workflow. But if they go for what do we need to do at the minimum, it's a bad place for everybody.
Robert?
Yeah, let's say my view from the justice area. Let's take a look at the stakeholders that e-justice should serve, and of course there are the civil servants at the court clerks, judges. There are the lawyers as more or less the clients of the courts, and the lawyers usually represent the citizen. Of course, since let's say at least from Austria, the average Austrian does not go to court without a lawyer. He contacts a lawyer, and then the lawyer deals with the court. So this is, let's say, the first community that we want to address, and justice, at least what I have learned till now, is the reason why we are doing e-justice is to save costs, to speed up the proceedings, to have better data quality. But what we also try to think of is, together with our colleagues from the e-justice portal, for example, for proceedings like the small claims proceeding, it might be feasible, possible that a citizen can also bring in a claim by using so-called dynamic forms that are available at the portal. And this might be something with which we can address citizens as well to make this access to justice easier and in a way that they can really follow the proceeding.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a moment and ask you, is there ever a danger with these sorts of digitized public services that we're creating solutions in search of a problem? Or do you think it is always driven by this urge to streamline, cut costs, and so on? Who wants to answer that?
Well, I'll just go through it. It is indefinite. In the case of the one I'm involved with, it is not a solution looking for a problem. This is a real problem. The massive costs associated with receiving and reconciling paper invoices that get buried in drawers, aren't paid promptly, that tie up liquidity. The public sector has demonstrated massive case studies where they can save huge amounts of money. I'm really surprised, actually, that it's taken a directive to sort of force the hand here. And it's a very soft directive. It just says you've got to be able to do it. It really is about this adoption. And I just add another point about the fact that you do need to get across this mentality of saying you don't have to do all this yourself. And I know public authorities often have that mentality. This is in my area. Now, the CEF building blocks are already a good step on the way to the philosophy of outsourcing, because there's a shelf-based solution. Bring it in and combine it. But it's not just these technical artifacts that people need to think about. It's the capabilities of other human beings in private sector enterprises. Don't worry about the fact they're in the private sector. They can help you. Now, I know there are issues of pricing and the feeling that, that maybe value for money is an issue, but believe me, in the long run, it's better to get the experts to help than to try and build it yourself. And I think building yourself, that does play to the point you make, that it's a solution looking for a problem. That is exactly the sort of solution you don't want, where a public body, for example, has built the all-singing, all-dancing solution to something, and that you're going to have it, you're going to get it, rather than to say, what can I take from the external environment and repackage and reuse in the world to face my problem?
I want to come back to the issue of outsourcing, but yes, Lucas, do you want to refute my proposition?
It's a boring panel when everyone ends up agreeing with you. But I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, the dirty secret underbelly of the e-government industry is there are a lot of solutions that get built for the sake of being solutions, often with EU funds, and then they sit on the shelf for quite a few years and don't get used. And there are ways to get around that, but probably the biggest tonic, especially if we're talking about basic infrastructure, is that you have the public and the private sector together on that. I certainly know, and that's what lets you get huge scale effects. I mean, this is something from our journey with electronic identity. We have, in Estonia, given now 400, and I just checked the number right now, 39 million electronic signatures for a country of 1.3 million, at a rate of about 65 million a year. So if you were to extrapolate that rate to Europe, you would have 400 billion qualified electronic signatures in Europe a year. Now, you can do the calculation on what that brings your cost per signature down to and what that means for the size of the industry. And that's come from the private sector, but also from the public sector. It came from some very simple, basic public sector mandates that the government has to accept electronic signatures, and you take the government to court if that didn't work. And it came from choosing a high level of ambition on things like the security level. In 2002, no one thought you had to do a qualified electronic signature for this to work, but we did, and that's what led the adoption. So maybe I'm just agreeing with everyone here, but yes, you need a high level of public sector ambition, but yes, you also have to do that with the private sector.
Dirk, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, well,
Esther,
I don't have to, I don't have to explain this for municipalities, of course, but the thing is that one of the other lessons that we're noticing right now is that first, we're so used to many existing problems that we don't even regard them as a problem. This is a feature. This is how you do it. And second to that is by getting these problems solved and these services digitized and accessible, is that now municipalities also start noticing that citizens come to them more easily and start talking back. So there's a dialogue going on where first it was the government trying to get this thing across to you and hoping you would go to their counter or do whatever you were requested to do. Now there's actually a two-way communication starting to be enabled, which is, I think we haven't seen where that's going yet.
Okay. Now, do we have questions or comments from anyone? Okay, the lady at the back. And I also want to there's a success story in the room, and we're going to listen to that in a moment. But yes, we can get a microphone. Yes. Person with the scarf.
Thank you very much. I'm Margareta Masura, EMF Services, Brussels-based consultancy. We heard a lot about cross-border services and also services for the citizen. What I'm really missing is what is about e-translation building block. How will you communicate across borders? How will you communicate effectively with the citizen? Thank you.
Really good question. Unfortunately, we don't have someone from e-translation on our panel.
Yeah, no, this is what we run into continuously, because Dutch municipalities have Dutch websites, and the Dutch wording for request a market stand permit is not really. You don't read it that easily. So that's a thing that's now coming along, is that they are confronted with all these non-native speakers and start to think about which languages they should support. So to be honest, e-translation was new to me, and I picked up a bunch of brochures there, but it's needed. And the weird thing is that our municipalities, if they're in the border area, they will tend to have information in German. We've got a lot of Moroccan and Turkish people here, so that's covered. But most of the other information is only available in Dutch, and we really need to look into that. And there's also questions coming, what languages should we support? I always say that depends on the service. If you're only offering very local services, then maybe it should be limited. But then again, if you're also having a lot of immigrants, for example, in your municipalities, you need to even extend beyond the European languages. You need to look into Arabic, for example.
Robert?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, in the justice era, e-translation would be of some relevance, since usually if you send something from A to B, from, let's say, Austria to France, then, let's say, the Austrian lawyer or court usually should send the document in the language of the receiving country, in French in this case. It's not difficult, of course, for Austria and Germany. So, but let's say the proceedings that we have implemented yet for our cross-border use cases are so-called proceedings with defined forms. For example, European Payment Order has forms in all languages of the EU, and the proceedings are defined or designed in a way that the form is sent in the language of the receiving country. Let's say if we send something to Greece, it will be sent in Greek language, and the structured form is defined, and this you can, let's say, implement more or less. The lawyer does not have to understand one word of Greek. But, of course, there are parts in the forms that have room for free text. This also has to be written in the language of the receiving country. And in this case, at the moment, the lawyers have to translate this by whomever. But in such use cases, I could imagine that, I don't know, in the future, e-translation would be relevant for such cross-border communication.
Mm-hmm. I think I used to work in DG translation, so I think I can say a word on e-translation. If I'm well informed, it's already used in systems like the system where the Publications Office publishes all the calls for tender as of a certain amount, so that it's accessible, so you don't have to speak the language of the local call for tender. Another interesting application is in online dispute regulation. So to avoid people having to go to court because they have a dispute in a trans-border transaction, there is a website where you can log your problem and you can start an à l'amiable a process to find a solution. And also there, again, by removing the language barrier and having a form that is automatically translated, you make it easier for the citizen to find a solution and not to have to hire a lawyer and spend a lot of money on something that probably costs less.
But may I add, even with non-legal documents, having your information in a digital way already is a plus. Because have you ever tried feeding a paper form into Google Translate and looking at Greek letters and not finding them on your keyboard? So how are you going to start then? I mean, even digitization first is already helping there.
Okay.
I mean, in the medium term, this problem is going to solve itself because the AI is going to get good enough, as a friend of mine here in the back row was pointing out. But the problem we're going to have is how do we manage that transition, and what do we do legally with all of these texts? I mean, it's going to be long time until we feel comfortable giving AI translated text official legal status. So in a sense, the technology is going to get there a lot faster than our organizational and our legal infrastructure will.
Okay, now, Dirk, I want to get our microphone over here to Dirk, because I know he's here representing Open Peppol, and I know that's a very interesting success story for people in the room.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sven Rasmussen from Denmark. I work with the Ministry of Finance and our agency for digitization. And I would like to share a little information about Open Peppol. And supplementing some of the information from Charles, I can tell you that Open Peppol is a non-profit international organization, and we manage probably the fastest growing e-invoicing network in Europe today. We have some 160 certified e-delivery access point providers spread over about 20 European countries, and we have collaboration with 9 Peppol authorities representing mainly public entities also spread in the European area. I think Open Peppol is a good example of the collaboration between private and public entities. And we have, it's important to say, we are not providing a solution, but we are providing management and governance of network connections, such as legal framework under which services are provided, certificates to support security, etc. If you want some more information, I think there are leaflets in the front, and you are most welcome to contact me. I'll be around all afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah, and there are also leaflets and information about e-translation services out there as well. It's very difficult to get everything brought together in a single panel. We have another question down here.
Hi, my name is Jos Eickhout. I'm from ECS, and I'm from the Netherlands. And I have an interesting question. Will my DigiD be replaced with an eID?
Well,
before you answer, because I want to bring the question, of course, a bit broader as just a Dutchman asking this question. Bringing it to European perspective, what will be the impact on already existing national initiatives while we create now these new building blocks coming in? Will it either be replaced? Will it be reconverted? How do you see that?
Oh, they work in cooperation. Where it's about DigiD, it will work based on building blocks from eID to connect you to Europe if the Netherlands decides to notify that system. So an eID to me is sort of this fuzzy container word that stands for more or less nationally recognized digital identity solutions. So, in fact, DigiD is an eID.
But I think this tension is a fundamental one you touch on too, which is always going to be tension between standardization and innovation. I can tell you I've butted heads plenty with friends in Connect and DigiDigit over different data exchange formats, and you know, they keep telling us the Estonian solution's nice, but it's never going to work in all 28 countries. So, cool, you know, hold your horses. No, and I think we're going to get into a situation where eID becomes fairly standardized in the next few years, but at the same time, we're moving to 3-factor authentication. We're working in biometrics in all sorts of ways. How do we differentiate between different levels of qualified electronic signatures? How do we update the standards which are now coded into the legal architecture to reflect that? I'm only asking that as questions, but I think that's always a tension, and you never want to be too rigid in your standardization of building blocks, and you want your framework to be open enough and enough of a meta framework that you can sort of, as the innovation becomes mature enough and sort of enough of a production service and broadly adopted enough that you can pull it in gradually and step by step, as opposed to suddenly having a point where people, it's a hard fork type of choice. Do I keep on going with the building blocks, or do I jump out into a different set of standards?
Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm not ignoring anyone. This side of the room? Okay, in that case, yep.
Over there.
Yes, yep.
Hi, my name is Behr. I'm with the Danish Ministry of Finance, and my job is to look across building blocks and how they relate to each other and how they orchestrated to provide that integrated service that we are dreaming of. So my question is more specific to the Dutch eID project. How do you communicate with your foreigners once they're logged on? Do you get any letters into their digital mailboxes, or how do you...
right now, how does the Dutch government communicate with its own citizens is kind of a mixed bag as well. Now, these municipalities, that's like digitized forms beyond that, where there's stuff in there. And as I said, Google Translate really helps. And it's usually about services they request from their municipality to get done. So they try to make really clear what it is. And some of these services are also really specific. If you want to report damaged property, it's usually this format. They say, okay, you take a picture, you tell us the location, and you send it off, and then we'll deal with it. So that's quite of a clear...
And how does the citizen know about when the case is done? Or because I'm really thinking you should...
There's contact details and contact information provided.
Exactly.
And in this case, that is, we've got a secure messaging box as well.
Like a Dutch one, correct?
Yeah, a Dutch one. Yeah, there's, yeah. But that's more of a one-way, the government has something to say to you. But yeah, true. No, to me, this also is something where the private sector has a lot more needs, but also should come to join us. Because in the public environment, it's about your name and your date of birth. It's not about what's your phone number and what's your email address and how can I contact you, which is much more important typically to the private sector. But we need to find ways to work with that as well. And that goes both on a high assurance level as a much lower one.
Exactly. So can I just ask for the European answer to this, saying who is actually the responsible for providing this kind of oversight, orchestration, ensuring, because we go into these almost silos.
Yeah, but again, it depends on the situation. If I want to talk to my government about my status of residency or my medical history, this is a completely different. If I want to be a street musician or a living statue on an event, I can be quite fraudulent on my application, but in the end, someone will show up on a street being a living statue, and you have to check that.
They probably have to have a document stating that they're allowed to do that. How do you get that document to the citizen?
I'm sorry?
How do you get the document about the certificate that they're allowed to be a street musician? Is that ever going to the citizen?
No, but typically this is handled now in an analog way. There's a policeman asking you on the street to show your credibility, and if they think you're dodgy or you're being a very nude live statue, then they'll take care of it, just as it would happen right now. The only thing is you don't need to show up in advance at the counter and deal with it. So it takes away about 2 weeks of hassling other stuff before you can go out and do things there.
Charles, you had a comment.
No, I just wanted to come back a little bit to the business environment. And I've heard a lot about EID, and I've looked at the way that regulation is taking shape in terms of implementation. But I came across something the other day, which I think, again, plays to this point about working together. There's an initiative for legal entities on a global scale called the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. Sounds a mouthful. It's a not-for-profit a venture which started, and it's under the control of the central banks of the world, and it started in the financial industry to make absolutely sure that people know who they're dealing with. And I think underneath EID, there is some work to be done. You can have a digital identity, of course, but if you combined the value of this GLIEF, the LEI, which is now spreading out into the business world, beyond the financial industry specifically, this could be really important because we don't have very strong systems across Europe or across the globe where we say, look, who is this company? Who's behind it? Who's it owned by? Where is it domiciled? And I was very impressed by these people. Please have a look at this website. I have nothing involved in it.
I second that, so I'm with you on this, yeah.
and it's actually chaired by a Dutchman, by the way. So.
Yeah, there's only 3 countries right now, I think, in Europe who do identification of legal entities.
And what they do is they take on board the identities of local registries. So it's not pie in the sky. It's not centralized in one place. But I think it's an initiative where we can put behind the digital identity a lot of strong business information so that we can do authentication and identity management at a business level, not just as a technical level. It's just a point I wanted to make.
Yes.
GLEIF.
So it's Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. It's a Swiss foundation. Its board is mainly in the financial world, but they're spreading in. They've come to us, for example, in the supply chain world and said, look, wouldn't it be great if when you get an invoice, you have a legal entity identifier on it, not just a VAT number or an old individual identity from a specific member state or a country. This could spread. They're heading off towards 1 million. They need about 50 million of these legal entity identifiers to really make an impact. I think it would be a good step forward. On top of all the beautiful technical artifacts that one hears about, we need more business content in many cases under these artifacts.
Okay, well,
Andrea's telling me they're already enrolled in eIDAS.
Good. Good. Yeah, because really business-to-business transactions tend to be really contain much more high-valued content. So,
I think the EU has to be a bit careful in mandating things like that. It's not but it would be great if cooperation took place where that thing became embedded and tolerated and facilitated. I think it would help, certainly my world, understand who they're dealing with. Because there are lots of fraudulent transactions in the world, let's face it, and sometimes they get through. They don't get through PEPOL, obviously. All my members are members of PEPOL. We support PEPOL hugely as one of the important networks for secure business. But as I said, in general, we do need to improve the integrity of our business knowledge.
And it also helps if you have like public-private partnerships or frameworks. There's a sort of meta level of identification needed, is where you identify all the service providers or other parties that play a crucial role within that ecosystem. You need to identify them at a higher level even than when you're going to start putting out services and working with your end user value. So that's where it's really could help.
Okay, have we any final question from the room? Yes, gentleman here. And keep it quite brief because we've only got 5 minutes before there's more coffee.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentations. My name is Radu Serrano. I'm a master's student at Leuven. And my question is, for other countries in the world that are trying to become interoperable or integrated, would you recommend doing the same things as you've done in the European Union, or could some things be improved?
Oh, that's a very leading question.
Right now.
Robert, I'll let Robert answer that first.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Thank you. Very interesting question, and I have indeed, I think, even a project that I can mention here that already uses the things we are using also in e-codex or in the e-justice domain outside Europe. It's the Hague conference. They're making a project for iSupport that deals with child support, child maintenance. And they are, as I said, they are using the building blocks, the e-delivery building block for their system, and they have interconnected, as far as I know, Brazil and the state of California. Some European countries as well, but they're still working on it. So this is really a concrete example that's already existing and using the building blocks here in this area.
Lucas?
Well, right now, the technical connectivity, if you look at what's out there with Stork and the EID building blocks, is there. The real hassle is the legal agreements and the accountabilities involved. That's the real hassle. But other than that, it works. Right now.
All I can maybe add to this is if you're going to look to any region in the world, for the moment it's still Europe where you probably have the highest volume of things to kind of copy-paste. And you should do that shamelessly. I mean, there should be no shame in copying someone else's solution and building them into something bigger. For the time being, the situation in the US is still pretty shambolic. The amount of time and money that's been invested elsewhere doesn't quite yet match what has been done in Europe. We'll see if that's still the case in 5 or 10 years' time, but that's for the next panel.
Yes, it is indeed. But Dirk, your thoughts on are there things we need to improve, or should we be shamelessly promoting ourselves?
I think there's always things to improve, but I think it's also sometimes like in this sort of thing to pat ourselves on the shoulder, and the teams and the many people who work behind the scenes to make this work, both within the institution and outside, and to say we've really come a long way, and let's congratulate ourselves, but let's not rest on our laurels and go forward and further improve.
Okay, so congratulations to all of you in the room then.
I'd just
Charles,
say,
you had a...
I mean, I've been very active supporting CEF in the development of the e-invoicing building block, and I've watched others like Pepl using e-delivery. I just think sometimes the language and the presentation is just a bit heavy, a bit dry. I have to say that when I look at the websites, I sometimes lose the will to live reading these. So my suggestion would be just get a bit more marketing savvy and put it out there in an easier way to use, because I compare private sector websites and tech people, fintechs, they tend to have a better RAS going with the
Have you looked at ITF recently? There's no marketing there, I assure you. They run the internet.
Well, I'm not talking about them. They're sort of deep in the cuisine. I'm talking about people with solutions.
Fair enough.
And I think that area needs some attention. That's all. It's just a small point, but since you asked, I will answer.
Okay. And we're going to wrap it up there. So thank you very much. As Lucas has already pointed out, the next panel is about what does the future hold. We have another coffee break, but I do want to encourage you, we talked about e-translation a little bit. Out in the foyer, there is the European Language Resource Coordination. Please go out and talk to them if you want to know more about that.